What would you do if the woman delivered to your doorstep was not a guest, not a servant, but a human soul traded like cattle? What if her silence carried wounds deeper than chains, and her first words shattered the grief you thought would never loosen its grip? In the ruthless Wild West, a cruel joke was meant to break a widowed cowboy, but instead it unearthed a truth so powerful it could change his family's fate forever. Would you dare to hear her story? The wind carried the smell of dust and whiskey when they brought her to him. Providence was the kind of town where cruelty was currency, and that day it spent lavishly. Elias, the rancher whose face was carved by grief and sun, stood silent on his porch. 2 years had passed since fever had stolen Sarah, his wife, and with her the laughter of his children. Now, instead of comfort, fate delivered a stranger bound not in chains, but in despair. Her name was never spoken, only a slur. The China girl, bartered across a gambling table like cattle. Silas, a man with a laugh like a rusted blade, tossed the words at Elias like spurs into open flesh. A wife for the widower, quieter than the last one. He let the venom linger, knowing Sarah's memory was still raw. The woman stood with nothing but a carpet bag and eyes fixed on the dirt, her silence heavier than any shackles. Elias said nothing. He only watched as Silas turned his horse and left her behind, a cruel gift dropped at the edge of a life already broken. From the window, Caleb and Leah peered out, their young faces pressed to the glass. They had learned to guard their sorrow in silence, just as their father did. And now another silence had arrived, fragile, nameless, and unwanted. Elias's boots thudded down the porch steps. He towered above her, yet she never lifted her gaze. In that moment he felt the weight of a choice. Cast her aside to a world of wolves, or shoulder yet another burden in a heart already fractured. His jaw tightened. He pointed not to his door, but to the side room once meant for hired hands. There. The word was flat, final. Then the screen door slammed, sealing her fate with his own. This was no rescue. It was the beginning of a storm. The first nights passed like a haunting. She moved through the ranch not as a guest nor servant, but like a ghost unwilling to claim her own shadow. The small cot in the side room became her refuge, a bare space with nothing but the smell of cedar and loneliness. Elias made no effort to soften her stay. His grief had forged walls thicker than timber, and he guarded them with silence. She never touched the main house while he was home. Only when he rode out to mend the far fences would she slip inside, sweeping away the layers of dust that clung like cobwebs of mourning. Shirts were washed, children's clothes folded, floors scrubbed, all returned without a word. In her presence lingered the faint smell of lye soap, cutting through the stale air of despair. Elias noticed, though he pretended otherwise. Plates left on the porch disappeared by dawn, scrubbed clean and set neatly back in place. She became part of the rhythm of the ranch, a presence felt but never acknowledged, like wind sighing through the eaves. The children were watchful. Caleb and Leah kept their distance, peeking from behind the barn, their wide eyes studying the stranger who tended their world without asking permission. They did not speak to her. They could not betray their mother's memory with kindness toward another woman. And she, sensing this, kept her distance, honoring their grief as if it were her own. But walls, no matter how carefully built, began to crack. One afternoon, Elias saw her stand before Sarah's rose garden, a patch of earth long surrendered to thorns and dust. He froze, anger striking his chest. That ground was sacred, a monument he had not dared disturb. Yet she did not mock it nor desecrate it. She knelt in silence, her small hands hovering over the dead soil, as if listening to something buried deep. The next morning, she returned with nothing but her bare hands and resolve. She began to pull weeds from the hardened earth. Day after day, under the punishing sun, she worked. Elias told himself to stop her, to demand she leave the ruins alone. But each time, he remained still. Perhaps he feared her persistence mirrored something he had forgotten: hope. From the window, his children watched, their suspicions slowly bending into curiosity. They saw her sweat, saw the dirt ground into her palms, saw reverence in every movement. It was not destruction, it was resurrection. She was not tearing down their mother's memory. She was breathing life back into the soil that had guarded it. One evening, Elias found a familiar shirt on his bed, the one he meant to throw away after barbed wire tore the sleeve. The rip was no longer a wound. Someone had stitched it with thread so fine it looked like rain across cloth. At the center, a tiny mountain flower bloomed, embroidered with care that did not ask to be seen. He ran a thumb over the silk lines and felt a hinge creak inside an old locked room. She was saying she was more than a purchase, more than silence. He wore the shirt at dawn and said nothing when she passed him by the well. But he left a bucket near the garden before he rode the fences. By evening the water was gone, the soil darker, the edges tidied. This exchange continued, he provided. She tended neither, claiming credit. The ranch, long mute, began to hum with intention. The earth softened under her persistence. Elias found his route home bending toward the garden, as if his boots had learned a new path. There he paused and pretended to check the sky while studying the fragile green pushing through. He told himself nothing would grow. Yet a stubborn thrill returned, the feeling a man gets when a long silent clock ticks once, then twice. The children crossed the line first. Leah walked up with a rusty trowel pried from a drift of weeds. She held it without speaking. The woman looked at the tool, then at the girl, and accepted it with slow gravity, their fingers touching a moment. Caleb came next, a palmful of seeds, dry as paper and light as a promise. She took them, nodded, and set them into earth. That night, the house felt changed. Elias set bowls on the table, ready for another meal buried in silence. Instead, a voice rose low and steady. The woman lifted her chin. "My name is Mai." The room held the words like a held breath. Caleb and Leah looked to their father. Elias's spoon hung in the air. A new weight settled, not sorrow but truth. He could not answer then, but morning found him at the yard gate as she passed with a pail. He inclined his head. "Mai." He spoke it plain, the sound strange and right at once. From that day she no longer ate on the porch. She sat across from him, a still figure with unyielding grace, and the children followed her to the garden. Bread began to replace dust. Floorboards grew clean. Shirts returned whole from the line. Elias left small offerings, a coil of thread, a bar of soap with faint lavender, a blanket for the cot. He was not decorating a cage. He was building shelter, the kind you raise when storms live inside the body as well as the sky. Days braided into a quiet pattern. Elias watched the garden alter the geometry of his grief. Rows straightened what sorrow had warped. Mai's work had an austere beauty. Measured strokes of the hoe, the patient tamp of her palm, a pause to read the wind as if it carried instructions. He learned her rhythms the way cowhands learn weather, not with talk but with the skin. Now and then he found signs of a life carried far, a length of silk thread coiled in paper, a folded scrap with characters like reeds in water. He never pried. He offered fence posts cut to size. She set bean poles. He stacked kindling. She lit bread ovens to a shy gold. Caleb began to bring questions. Leah brought small jokes, bright as buttons. Mai answered with nods, a rare smile, a story told by hands. One dusk, Elias lingered by the rose bed. New shoots bowed under the evening breeze. He felt gratitude rise, awkward and startling. "You've made the ground, remember," he said at last. Mai glanced up and after a heartbeat replied, "The ground only waits." The words reached places the wind could not. That was the week. The sky went tight with heat. Horses tossed their heads. Birds fled the cottonwoods. A bruise of clouds spread from the far mesas like a stain, and along its hem rode a single figure. Elias knew the seat, the lean, the swagger, before he knew the face. Silas. He came at a collector's pace, sure of the debt and the payer. Elias sent the children inside with a look. Mai stood by the garden with a trowel in her fist, knuckles pale, eyes clear. Silas drew up, gaze sweeping porches, tools, the newly tended earth. "Providence treats you well, widower," he said, sliding from the saddle. "I'll be taking my property. Buyer in Carson City likes them quiet." He smiled like a snapped trap. The word landed like grit between Elias's teeth. Property. He felt the old rage uncoil, slow as a rattler. He stepped from the porch. The boards gave a single complaining creak. "You'll turn around," he said, voice low as thunder, still leagues away. Silas put a boot on the first stair. Rain licked the wind in cool stray drops. The storm at last had found its mark. Silas's hand reached for Mai as if she were a tool left on Elias's porch. That movement broke something buried in Elias, a hinge rusted shut since Sarah's death. He caught Silas's wrist, the grip forged not in grief, but in the soldier he once had been. Silas sneered, tried to twist free, but the rancher's strength was iron hammered by loss. The fight was not wild. It was stripped, deliberate, each blow landing with the precision of a man who knew violence only as necessity. Silas staggered back, blood at his lip, boots skidding in the dust. Thunder cracked, rain slashed the air in sharp, cold blades. Elias stood tall, chest heaving, a sentinel before his door. "This is her home," he thundered, the words ripped raw by storm. "You are not welcome. Not now. Not ever." Lightning carved the horizon, illuminating Silas's face, twisted from arrogance into fear. He saw not the broken widower he had meant to mock, but a man anchored by something stronger than grief, resolve. And in that instant, Silas understood Elias would kill before surrendering her. Silas swung onto his horse. Fury curdled into terror and disappeared into the sheets of rain. The storm swallowed him whole, leaving only the scent of ozone and the rhythm of falling water. Elias remained on the porch, soaked, fists raw and stinging. The storm outside matched the storm within, yet in that violence he felt clarity. He had not fought to defend property. He had fought to defend life, dignity, and the fragile seed of belonging that Mai had planted in his home. When he stepped inside, lamplight glowed soft against the wet of his clothes. The children slept. Mai waited. On the table she had set a bowl of warm water, a tin of salve, and a cloth folded neat. No words passed. She reached for his hands and cleaned the cuts with patience, her touch sure, her silence more intimate than speech. Her fingers traced the bruises along his knuckles, steady as if stitching him back together. Elias watched her face in the lamplight, the furrow of concentration, the stillness born not of fear but of endurance. He realized then that her scars were not carved on skin, but in the way she carried silence like a shield. When she finished, she looked into his eyes. For the first time, Elias did not see a stranger or a burden. He saw a survivor who had stood before storms of her own and had not yielded. Gratitude swelled in him, awkward, untamed. The words slipped out rough as gravel. "Thank you." Mai did not answer, only let a faint smile curve her lips, fragile as the first blossom in spring. That smile was not submission, it was recognition. Two broken lives had found in each other a mirror, and the reflection was whole. Morning came clear, the skies scrubbed clean by the night's fury. The ranch glistened as if dust had been washed away from more than earth. Elias walked to the garden where seedlings stood taller, drops of rain shining on their leaves like scattered coins. Caleb and Leah crouched close, whispering discoveries, their laughter light, unguarded. Mai rose from the soil when she saw him, her hands streaked with mud, her eyes steady. She glanced at the children, the house, the flourishing garden, then back to him. Her gaze spoke the truth. She would not dress in words. This is home. This is ours. Elias felt the old knot in his chest loosen. He placed a calloused hand on her shoulder, hesitant, reverent. No declaration was needed. The gesture carried everything, a pledge of protection, of partnership, of shared survival. In that moment, the cruel joke Silas had meant to play had turned on him. What was meant as mockery had become providence. The days that followed unfolded with a gentler rhythm, as if the storm had scoured away not only dust but sorrow. Bread baked in the oven filled the rooms with warmth, children's clothes hung crisp on the line, and laughter hesitant at first returned to Caleb and Leah's voices. Each evening, Elias found himself lingering at the table, studying Mai across the lamplight, struck by the quiet strength that radiated from her. She was not Sarah, and she never tried to be. Sarah had been sunlight and laughter, a memory sealed in roses. Mai was endurance carved in stone, a promise that even shattered hearts could keep beating. Elias began to see that his home did not have to remain a mausoleum. It could breathe again because she was teaching it how. He left small tokens on her cot. A better blanket, a bar of lavender soap, a spool of bright thread, each gift unspoken, yet each one answered by the return of order, care, and a peace the house had not known in years. It was not the old life reborn. It was a new one, stitched from the remnants, stronger at the seams. Silas's laughter still echoed sometimes in Elias's mind, but it no longer cut. That day in the storm had drawn a line across the earth. On one side, grief that had drowned him, on the other, the fierce will to protect what remained. He understood at last. Family was not always something you inherited. Sometimes it was something you fought to deserve. And though the ranch looked the same to a passing rider, inside its walls, everything had shifted. What had entered as a cruel bargain had become the seed of salvation. Elias could not yet call it love, but he knew one thing with certainty. Silas would never again set foot on this land, and Mai would never again be treated as less than her name. Morning after morning, the ranch woke like a chest learning to draw a full breath. Fences rose straight, hinges stopped complaining, and the well bucket came up cold and clean. In the garden, shoots thickened into rows. Leah named the stoutest sprout Sarah's Hope, and no one corrected her. Caleb built a scarecrow from Elias's ruined coat, and Mai stitched a face on it, two careful eyes, a mouth set in resolve. Work bound them into a single rope. Elias spoke more, short sentences at first, then whole thoughts, stories of trail seasons and the way a herd moves before lightning. Mai answered in the language of doing bread, scored just so, a shirt mended invisible, bean poles crossed to cradle the wind. Some nights, she shared small memories in a quiet voice, a willow river, indigo cloth, a mother's hands teaching the first stitch. The children listened. Elias rode to Providence with a new purpose. He asked the clerk for papers, employment, residence, and a sworn statement under his name, that Mai was free on his land, owing no man, protected by his roof and his word. The clerk peered over spectacles. You courting trouble, Elias? His gaze did not waver. I'm ending it. The seal fell with a thud, like a small hammer of justice. News drifts faster than tumbleweed. By sundown, the saloon carried talk of the papers and the storm fight. Two ranchers offered quiet nods. One widow pressed a parcel into Mai's hands, dried apples and a spool of thread. Providence, which had spent cruelty like coin, began counting its change. At home, the rosebed answered. Red pushed from thorn, pale pink from old wood. Elias stood at dusk and saw that morning was not a fence but a gate. He opened it and called the children. Come see. Mai came last, wiped her hands, and stood beside him, not behind. That night he carved a small plank for the side room and burned one word into it with a hot nail, M-A-I. Leah traced the letters. Later at the table, Mai taught a simple stitch on coarse linen. Fingers learned patience, one loop at a time. Elias read from Sarah's worn Bible, the word steady, and the house did not ache. Summer ripened across the plains, and with it the ranch changed its voice. Where silence had once clung heavy as dust, sounds now wove through the rooms, Leah's laughter breaking into song, Caleb's hammer tapping together a toy cart, the hush of Elias and Mai speaking low by lamplight. No longer ghosts orbiting each other. They had become a circle drawn close. Elias worked longer in the fields, but the burden felt lighter. He would glance toward the house and see Mai with the children, her hair loose in the wind, teaching them how to grind herbs or mend torn sleeves. The sight struck him each time, an image of life he had thought buried with Sarah. And yet this was not replacement, it was rebirth. The roses confirmed it. Where thorns had ruled, blossoms now crowned the air with scent. Elias walked there often, sometimes with a child in each hand, sometimes alone. He began to speak to Mai beside the garden, small admissions. How Sarah had sung while cooking, how grief had made the world gray, how he had not believed joy could return. Mai never offered hollow comfort. She simply listened, her gaze steady, her silence a soil in which his words could take root. Providence, too, shifted in its stance. When Elias rode into town, men greeted him with nods, some with respect newly earned. A few looked away, remembering Silas's flight in the storm. Whispers carried. The widower had found more than survival. He had found his ground again. One evening, Caleb and Leah surprised them both. They carried a wooden box, awkwardly nailed together. Inside lay seeds gathered from the garden, wrapped in scraps of cloth. For planting next spring, Leah explained. Elias looked at the children, and felt something unlock that was not grief but gratitude. Later that night, thunder muttered far off, gentle this time. Elias stood on the porch. Mai joined him, her shoulder brushing his. They said nothing, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was shelter. Autumn came, painting the plains in bronze and amber. The ranch held steady, alive in ways Elias had thought lost forever. At dawn he often found Mai already in the garden, her hands damp with dew, the children trailing behind her like shadows learning to be light. She taught them patience with soil, courage with failure, and joy in the smallest green shoot. Elias felt himself changing too. The rage and grief that had weighted every step gave way to a quieter strength. He no longer avoided Sarah's memory. Instead, he carried it alongside the present, a twin thread woven into new cloth. In the evenings, he would tell the children stories of their mother, and Mai would sit nearby, listening, respecting each word without intrusion. In that balance, Elias realized love and remembrance could dwell together. One Sunday, he brought out the papers he had signed in Providence. He placed them on the table before Mai. These say you belong to no one. Not even me, only yourself. She touched the seal with trembling fingers. Her eyes lifted, shimmering not with tears but with the weight of freedom finally named. For a long time, no one spoke. Caleb broke the hush with a single word, family. From that night, something subtle shifted. Mai was no longer a guest or even a guardian. She was a pillar of the house, as much a part of its frame as the beams that held it against the wind. Elias did not declare it, but each gesture, the place he saved for her at the table, the way he spoke her name with steady respect made it true. The roses bloomed once more before the frost, their fragrance drifting through the windows. Elias stood in the yard, watching the children chase each other around the garden, while Mai leaned against the fence post, her hair loosened by the breeze. He stepped beside her, their shoulders touching, and together they watched the sun sink behind the ridge. It was not an ending. It was the promise of seasons still to come. In the Wild West, cruelty often rode faster than mercy. Yet even in that barren soil, seeds of grace could root. The tale of Elias and Mai reminds us that what enters our lives as burden may in time reveal itself as blessing, if only we dare to see beyond the surface of suffering. A woman once bartered as property became the healer of a broken house, and a man hollowed by grief found that silence could be filled again, not with noise, but with the quiet labor of care, respect, and dignity. Every weed Mai pulled was more than toil. It was a declaration that despair would not have the final word. Every stitch she sewed was more than repair. It was proof that broken things can be made not only whole, but beautiful. Elias learned that strength is not the hardness of stone, but the courage to protect, to tend, and to love after loss. His children discovered that memory need not be a chain, but can be a bridge, carrying them from the shadow of their mother's absence into the light of a new presence. The moral lies not in the storm that drove Silas away, though justice has its place. It lies in the garden that rose from dust, in the laughter that returned to a table, in the quiet nod of a cowboy who chose to honor a woman's name. It teaches us that family is not only a matter of blood, nor love only a matter of chance. Sometimes it is an act of will, built each day in sweat, silence, and small mercies. So let us remember, no soul is property, No heart beyond renewal. Dignity, once recognized, transforms both the giver and the receiver. Compassion is never wasted. It turns thorns into blossoms and strangers into kin. In a world that often deals cruelty like a stacked deck, the greatest rebellion is to nurture, to protect, to call another by their true name. The story of Elias and Mai does not end at a single season. It echoes for all who walk through grief and think themselves too broken to begin again. It says, life can bloom after drought, love can grow in unlikely ground, and the cruelest jest of fate may yet conceal the doorway to redemption.